emerges and things progress with the research. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see the reaction today. There's some data and some numbers to look at, so I will be quite cautious and slow, hopefully, as we go through. But yeah, very excited. Okay. I know that we had quite a number of registrations, so we'll see. It's still January. Everyone's having January blues in the Northern Hemisphere. So
same here. Same here. I saw you mentioning or referring to data and findings on your LinkedIn post, and I'm really curious. I'd really like to see what have you had good responses from or participation in terms of your research side from your webinars on the Good Governance Academy?
Yeah, we've had some interest. I think today I would really like to welcome more interest. I think as we're learning, as we're progressing, I think it would be lovely to have more organizations participate in what we're doing. So I would always welcome contact from any of our participants on this webinar to come and join us on this journey. It feels like a roller coaster sometimes. You have to keep a very open mind. We all have these preconceptions, don't we, as to what governance is, what it looks like, how it feels. But as I begin my presentation today, I'll say that perhaps we need to walk with a more open mind. But yeah.
Good. Yeah, and that's illustrated on our forum and through the Good Governance Academy. So many angles, so many views, and all of them, valuable and important to get a overall bigger picture of what is corporate governance. So indeed,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, not sure any of us really know what it is. I'm not going to profess to know what it is even today.
Yeah, we're still struggling to get it right all over the world. So and I think the target also moves, whatever the risks and the challenges globally are, whether it be, geopolitical or, a COVID pandemic, etc., governance moves and the target changes with that.
I think you're right. And I think as we'll touch on today, even in the year that we've been recording our data and observing our data, the influences on organizational governance do shift, and they shift over time. They might shift over time within an organization itself. And I think this is something that's so exciting about what we're doing, is that we're saying that you cannot say that one size fits all, and this and I don't demean the approach of corporate governance codes, but broad brush approaches to complex systems. You only have to peel back the surface of that and realize that that's not the way to move forward. So we're hoping that we can begin to support a wider community, so obviously this community here, but also maybe regulators around the world in what we're observing over time. So yeah, it's a fascinating subject, of course. That's why I hope
absolutely
we're all
and
here.
Dynamic.
Indeed. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, in the meantime, welcome to our attendees. We're going to give it another minute or so for everyone to join. In the meantime, in the chat, please tell us where you're from. And we're happy to see you back. I'd like to know if any of you are joining us for the first time. Give us a hi in the chats, please. I see we've got Silikani from Santon, Rebecca from Namibia, another Namibia person, Horst Simon, and then Pretoria, Patrice Lancea. It's great. Candice also from Cape Town, and Nustrati, Ibrahim from Dubai. It's great to have everyone on board. I'm so excited for our third part, but let's give it perhaps another minute or so. Peter Ewing from the FCA in the UK, Henry from Cape Town. Welcome, everyone. I'm glad to see you back at work from holiday.
Yeah.
I just got back a week ago. So also getting back into the swing of things. And I noticed today I still have a few colleagues still on leave. So it's time to get back.
Hi, Donna from East London. Look at that. That's closer to where I am here in Little Guernsey in the middle of the English Channel. So yeah, absolutely.
Oh, wow.
I feel a bit closer to home now. Hi, David from Spain. Hello.
Okay. So shall we get going then?
Yes.
All right, Baron, thank you. So from me, I'm Lindy Greber from the Good Governance Academy, specifically focusing on the research projects. I'd like to welcome you to a new year, embarking on big things in 2023 from a governance perspective. So I'd like to welcome Perrin Carey from CoSteer to present the third part in his series of webinars on the interconnectedness between corporate governance and culture. It really has been captivating and so interesting. As an accountant, I've learned so much from you in 2022, and we're really looking forward to a productive 2023. So, Perrin, thank you so much for joining us once again, and I'm handing over to you. Thanks.
Lovely. Thank you, Lindy, and thank you to the Good Governance Academy for inviting us and me to present. Yes, this is the third time that I had the opportunity to present to you, and this time what I want to do is cover off three aspects really. I want to look at a little bit about the methodology and the way that we've approached the measuring of governance as a complex system. Secondly, I want to talk a little bit about the data that's emerging from our initial research. And then thirdly, I want to touch upon how this can be practically used within boardrooms, within organizations, to really look at improving the quality of governance and the quality of decision making in organizations. So fingers crossed, I will be able to share my screen, and Lindy, if you can just let me know if that's visible, that's great.
Yes, it is. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. You know, when I first embarked on this journey about 3 years ago, I really had to set aside my preconceptions about what governance might look like. And that brought about a huge amount of anxiety and a huge amount of fear inside me, because of course setting aside our comfort, setting aside what we currently believe is an anxiety provoking place to be. It takes us out of our comfort zone. But I think in order to get closer to the truth, to something, I think it's necessary. And I'm just going to pause for just a moment of stillness. There's a lot to cover today, but I just wanted to pause for a moment of stillness and just reflect as you read through this from Pema Chodron. And I just want to talk through the last phrase. For all we know, when we get to the horizon, we're going to drop off the edge of the world. Like all explorers, we're drawn to discover what's waiting out there without knowing yet if we have the courage to face it. And I think the road of discovery that we've been on at CoSteer and that I've been on personally has felt like this on quite a few occasions. If you're going into a subject area with an open as mind as possible, and trying to distance yourself from maybe shared collective views from huge bodies of evidence around the world, but saying I need to somehow protect myself from that because perhaps it isn't what we think it is. But that requires a huge amount of courage. because you don't really know whether you can truly face the outcome. So there are three things that I wanted to cover today. How have we approached the measurement of governance from a complexity perspective? For those of you that have been on our webinars before, you'll understand what I mean by that. Those of you that haven't, I will do a little recap in a moment. Secondly, how the interconnected relationships have emerged through the analysis of our data. I am going to put some slides up that will look fairly complex, but we will pause and we will look at them carefully and hopefully draw out some of the key elements. And then finally, I want to think how we think that this method of measuring governance actually enhances its power and really moves it and shifts it from being a compliance exercise, which I say regretfully and sadly has become, and moves it much more into the frame that I believe it should sit, which is as a performance outcome. So a quick recap. Our perspective of governance is that it's beautiful. We draw a metaphor, an analogy between the governance of organizations and starlings in murmuration. We think that organizations, groups of humans, because that's really all they are, should have the ability and the capacity to murmurate like starlings. And if we can begin to understand how groups of humans perform their version of murmuration, then I think we can really get to grips with what governance actually looks like and feels like. We all know, because we can see it and bear witness to it, that governance is shifting. The views and perspectives of it are changing and shifting around the world. You know, King 4 in the kind of mid, 2016, 2017, as it emerged as an outcomes-based corporate governance code, the ISO 37000, here we are, purpose sitting at the core of organizational governance. And we see other aspects of business shifting again, all being driven by the crises, the numerous crises that are emerging for us as a human species on this planet. So I think if governance is to play its true role, then we really need to observe it from this perspective. And I think research is just that. It's observing. What are we observing? And this is what I want to share today. And I think it's too easy for us sometimes as humans to look for the simple, quick solution. There's a crisis in our organization. How are we going to immediately solve it? There's a crisis in the market. How are we going to solve that? There's a crisis in our country. How are we going to solve that? Simple, linear, binary solutions, we know, do not solve complex problems. And I think this is probably one of the reasons why, if you do a literature review of the interrelationships between governance, organizational culture, organizational performance, purpose, staff retention, etc., even if you look at board diversity, you will see conflicting outcomes from the research. And I think that one of the reasons for this is not just methodology and approach, but I think it's also because governance is not a simple system. It's complex. So as a consequence, we need to approach it from that perspective. I always think this is an interesting quote to just reflect upon. So if governance is a complex system, and I think there are many people out there who would argue quite strongly that it is, the characteristics of a complex system are that they are interconnected, unpredictable, and uncontrollable. And I remember when I put this slide up in my first or second presentation that I did here, I did warn people. I said, as governance professionals, many of you, as those of you trying to control the outcomes within your businesses, this is quite scary. However, the second paragraph gives us hope, because in dealing with governance as a complex system, what we can actually do is we can begin to better understand the interrelationships that occur within a group of humans, within an organization. And if we can identify the factors that are most strongly interrelated with each other, then we can begin to participate more actively in promoting what I think most of us would want, which is good governance. And this is what we're endeavoring to do within our research, within our work, and through our technology. And I think one other aspect of governance that we purport in our research is that it is incredibly difficult to measure. And there have been many research studies that have tried and endeavored to make connections between governance and organizational performance, board diversity, and the quality of decision making. And I absolutely welcome all of that research. But it is incredibly difficult. And the way in which governance has been codified, which although I completely understand, means that many organizations and indeed approaches to measuring governance approaches it as a comply, explain, tick box approach. And as a consequence, I think we're missing the real power, because governance is not a linear binary relationship. Board diversity on its own clearly is not going to improve the quality of decision making. You need to actively include those. You need to create senses of belonging. You need to inspire, very, very accurate, valid information in order to be able to make quality decisions. These things are hugely complex and interrelated. So measuring governance is incredibly difficult. And I think what we need to begin to do is move towards measuring governance from a perspective of output, which is exactly how King 4 begins to approach governance. It looks at governance as a concept of outcomes. But if it's a measurement of outcomes, you've got to do some things to get those outcomes, right? What is it that you do in order to get the outcomes? For example, for the Malomey-Lesotho governance code, 3 principal outcomes, yeah? Productivity, intergenerational value, and peace. What amazing outcomes. But what are the things that we actually need to do in order to get those outcomes? And I think these are the things that we've been studying and looking at, and how those are interrelated. So before we dive into what we found, what we've discovered, and how we're using it, I wanted to just remind ourselves of our model of governance, created, I have to say, in an intense period of kind of literature study, review, bouncing ideas off far more esteemed colleagues than mine around the world in governance. But we came up with what we felt was a practical map, a practical understanding of the elements that interface with each other in order to provide these outcomes of governance that we're looking for. Value creation, productivity, high quality decision making. But what are the things that we need in order to do that? What are the things that we need to do well in our organizations to do that? So we created a model that's based on these principles: connectedness. You can't separate the quality of the decision making from the culture that exists in your organization, as an example. It's complex. These things are interrelated. They're inseparable. But what are those relationships? And can we begin to understand them better? Governance is not a compliance exercise. And I know that there are codes, and I absolutely, welcome those that are out there that write these codes and endeavor to make the world a better place. But governance really needs to be a performance quantifiable exercise. All right. And this is what we're endeavoring to do. And we're trying the best that we can to break ground in front of us. So governance is on a continuum. Yeah, you will be good at it some days and bad at it other days. You cannot be compliant for 12 months. That is unrealistic, it's unattainable, and it's unachievable. I think leadership need to understand that governance is an ongoing exercise, time and time again. It's collective. Governance isn't just about what the board does, decides, and implements. The governance exercise is collective across your organization. Our view of governance is that we want to see how the organization as a group of humans is performing as a collective, because that gives us a true impression of being able to look at governance throughout, vertically and horizontally. And our approach is that we want to co-steer with organizations. We're here to support organizations in enhancing the power and the performance of their governance through quantifiable measurement. So how have we approached this from a complexity perspective? Imagine, right? There are all these different facets, all these different factors and indices that influence the quality of our governance. It might be the clarity of the purpose of your organization. It might be the quality of data that resides within your organization and floats around your organization, hopefully with sound, robust information flow processes. The efficacy, the effectiveness, the efficiency of your procedures. Yeah, we spend hours and hours writing and documenting procedures. The efficacy, the efficiency of those procedures. Clearly, these things play a role in the effectiveness of governance, the implementation, and how the humans, the group of humans, murmurate together. But some of these are going to be more dominant than others. They have to be. If you've got a group of 27 factors that you think might influence the quality of governance in an organization, some are going to be more important than others. There's a scale of dominance. But the question is, what is that scale of dominance? Is the quality of data more important than the efficacy of procedures? Or perhaps the clarity of purpose is what drives organizational governance? We didn't know the answer to that question. We think we're beginning to understand the interrelationships, and we'll present some of that in a moment. But this isn't the only question. It isn't just about which ones are more dominant. What we're also interested in is how are these things interconnected? How does the clarity of purpose influence the quality of data? Is that a strong relationship? Is it a weak relationship? How does the efficacy of procedures, is that influenced in any way by the quality of data that emerges in our organization? The quality of decisions we make, is that influenced by the values that we have within our organization? What are the interrelationships? And of course, what we can then do is we can map those across each other. We can say, we understand the emerging dominant factors affecting organizational governance, and we can understand the strength of the relationships that exist between these 27 factors. This has been our work over the last 18 months, investigating and understanding these dominant factors and interrelated connections. We collected our data using a very carefully designed 36-statement survey. This is just an example, but I wanted to cover off a couple of points here. We were very meticulous in the way in which we designed our statements, and we were very conscious that surveys have inherent challenges. And one of those is simply getting accurate and reliable data. So one thing that we investigated and then implemented was having a duality to our measurement tool. So we don't just ask participants their agreement with a particular statement. We also ask how confident they are in their answer. And what we know from behavioral science is that's very interesting, because as innately human beings, we need to be right. It's innate because it's important to be right for our survival. So often when we survey participants, you can find that the skew is towards, is this the right answer? But actually, by affording the ability of participants to express their confidence, that need to be right or wrong dissolves. There are many other reasons that we phrased our statements and formed them in this way, but I can't touch on them all today. But what this allowed us to do, and this is where our strong metaphor between starlings in murmuration and humans in murmuration is able to be manifested, So on the left here, you can simply see an organization. These are the people in that organization. This is real data. So this organization over here, you can see here is their score and their level of agreement. And over here is the expression of their confidence. So you can see where you would like people to be is up here. Yeah, I'm very strongly in agreement, or at least I'm giving positive outcomes within my scoring. And I'm very confident with those outcomes. That's where we would like people to be. Clearly, where we don't want people to be is down here. Yeah, expressing incredibly low scores, but also with high levels of confidence. Yeah. So these people down here are saying, yeah, we're very confident that we're rubbish at this. Yeah. And what we're seeing and emerging within our data are different patterns to this. And we use these data to calculate 3 aspects of organizational murmuration. And over here, just to show you other aspects that we do, these are the indices from our model. So this is, again, a murmuration plot of the factors. So you can begin to see how the factors are spread. Blue being culture, orange the decision making, and yellow decision implementation. So you can see pictorially even, we can see an expression of an organization that perhaps you've never seen before. But that isn't the magic. The magic is in understanding the interconnected relationships. Because if we can begin to understand the interconnected relationships, then we can begin to steer organizations towards exactly where to spend their money, time, and effort. And if I've learned anything in my former corporate career, we were deliberating, where do we need to spend the money in order to improve business performance? There was an endless debate, more often than not, led by issues and problems. We've got a problem over here, spend money. We've got a problem over here, spend money. We've got an issue that might emerge here, let's spend some money. And a lot of it was finger in the air stuff. But what if we had enough of an understanding of how these relationships are connected that we could actually begin to steer organizations towards where to spend their money, time, and effort to maximize return on investment? This is where our journey has led us. The first thing I just want to say is that we were really clear about ensuring that both our methodology and indeed the data that we were collecting was externally assured. So right at the beginning, we asked an independent organization, Dori Financial Modeling, to review both our methodology, so our statements and our initial tranches of data. And from that, they were able to produce essentially an independent report of our assessment methodology. Obviously, as a company that is not in the space of being in a university, we don't have an independent assurer of the work that we're doing, but we felt it was absolutely critical that we had independent assurance of our methodology. So this is really just to give you all assurance that we've had this independently assessed. Okay, let's have a look at what we're finding. So you remember, we're measuring 27 factors that we think influence organizational governance, emerging from 3 core domains: culture, decision-making, and decision implementation. So when we look at our data, we've been able to draw a clear curve that essentially is saying there are 8 core dominant factors. Now, we're not saying that these are the most important. Let me just be very, very clear here, because we have to do 2 things to decide which are the most important. The first thing is saying, how dominant are they on governance performance? And 8 emerged as being the most important. And then what you see here is a tail in that graph. So as this graph tails, the dominance of these indices lessens. Interestingly, dominance is not the same as the strength of a relationship. Dominance says, this is the largest ball. If you remember going back to our little diagram, this is the largest ball within our framework. So we had 8 fairly large balls that were the factors of our influence. Okay. Second thing, we wanted to understand what were the levels of predictability from each of the factors that we measure. So we did basically some factor analysis that looked at the outcomes from the initial tranches of data that we had, 16,000 data points. And when we reviewed that data, what we wanted to do is we wanted to look at the predictability, essentially, of that data. Are the statements interrelated in order for us to be able to understand the connections that exist between these factors? Are we able to express, are we able to quantify these relationships? And the only way we could do that and be sure of that is if there was high levels of predictability. So this was the statement, and I'm just going to pause and just go through this steadily with you. So when we had our independent assurers looking at our survey design methodology and initial tranche of data, what they're looking for are patterns and clusters. Because without patterns and clusters, there is no way in which you can discover interrelationships. So what we asked Doria Financial Modeling to do was to look at essentially the predictability of the statements and whether or not that predictability would then allow us to uncover the interrelationships, because that was our next challenge, our next journey. So they say, you know, by way of illustration, if an individual's answers are completely unpredictable, then you can't use the information to feed back into corporate policy and, you know, back into understanding the interrelationships. But what they found in our data, what they found in our survey instrument, was 8 broad themes, and they were indicating very strong levels of statistical significance. So if we just go back to that slide there, what we would normally expect to see in survey instruments is a predictability value of somewhere between 25 and 55%. 55% would indicate a very high level of kind of statistical predictability. As you can see within our instrument, we're seeing much higher than that. So when we had our discussions with them, they were essentially saying, your instrument is incredibly accurate at being able to pick up interrelationships if they exist. All right, this is just the first stage. Can this instrument, does it have the power to pick up these interrelationships? Their answer was an absolute definitive yes. It's very strong levels of statistical significance and cross-validation between statements. So the next thing was to begin to uncover these interrelationships. What are the strengths of relationships, for example, between the clarity of purpose and the quality of decision making? What's the strength of the relationship between empathy of leadership and adherence to values within an organization? Are there strong relationships going on between these? Common sense says there should be, but are we seeing that in the data? I don't want to dive too much into the numbers, but what I'm highlighting here, along the top, we've got our 8 dominant indices. You remember I said there were 8. These are our 8. I'm not putting them in any particular hierarchical order because the top 3 or 4 can be interchangeable, just simply because of the strengths of the relationships. But here, look at this. Yeah, if you're a regulator out there, yeah, the pressing of saying organizations need to have independent assessment and assurance frameworks within their organization. Absolutely, it's a dominant factor. The data says that to us. This one here, you can't see it, it's just hiding behind my little red box. Internal challenge of values. Is it a psychologically safe enough environment within my organization to challenge when values are not being lived in my organization? Hugely influential factor. Very strong in its interrelationships and connections with other aspects. Leadership trust. The development of trust in leadership through empathic leadership. This is what this is measuring. A highly interconnected with other aspects within organizational governance. And it keeps going. The communication clarity. Using relevant and meaningful data to make decisions. Is our data not just accurate? Is it meaningful? You can have wonderfully accurate data, but if it means nothing to you, it's useless. Robust and consistent data interrogation methods. Training and support. These are all things that we're very, very familiar with. Our data is very clear. And we've run this now on our second tranche of data. This is actually data from our first assessment, but we've run it a second time through our machine learning. The responses are slightly different in order, but the 8 dominant features remain. So what's this telling us? Okay, this looks incredibly complicated. I haven't filtered this in any way. This is the raw data emerging from our organizations, analyses of organizations and their governance. You won't know what the numbers mean, but the numbers mean is not perhaps as relevant as what we're seeing. So this is a heat map of interrelationships. So essentially, along the 2 edges here, you've got our indices, our factors. These are the factors that we're measuring. 36 down here, 36 across here. This is a heat map. The greener the square, the stronger the relationship, and the more positive that relationship. You can indeed, of course, have negative relationships. We haven't found one yet, but you could have a strong negative relationship. So, just as a couple of illustrations, so it makes the point of what we're seeing here. This red longitudinal box here is highlighting the attribute, the factor, clarity of purpose. So on the face of it, we would like to presume that the clarity of purpose within our organization would have a strong influential relationship across other factors within organizational governance. Maybe not. Now that's a challenge, isn't it? But let me say the next slide, and then you'll understand what we're seeing. The column next to it says absolutely, this factor is green almost throughout. There is a strong interrelationship with this factor throughout the entire suite of other factors. There isn't really a red one in it, maybe the very top one, which is interesting because that's clarity of purpose. But what we're seeing here is how embedded is your purpose and your values in your organization. So when we're looking at this, what we're seeing in this example is that, yes, clarity of purpose might be important, but it doesn't have the strength of relationship that it does when the purpose and the values within your organization are actually embedded. They are being lived. They form the basis of your decision making. That's how we phrase our statement within our survey. Do the values in your organization form the basis of your decision making? If they do, within your organization, we are seeing very strong relationships across the entire suite of other factors. It influences all the other 26. And we see that with other indices as well. But I wanted to just highlight this one. one other aspect, I think, before we just dive into how we're utilizing some of these data. Here's an example. So across here, across the top here, we've got essentially quality of leadership. You won't know what these numbers mean, but this is looking at quality of leadership. Does the quality of leadership influence the quality of decision making? Look at this. So we're seeing, yeah, mixed bag here, all right, in terms of purpose and values and what have you. As soon as we drop into section 2, which looks at the quality of decision making within our organization, we can see a strong, very green relationship between the quality of the leadership. If leadership is leading with empathy, is developing psychological safety within your organization, we see very strong relationships between that and the quality of decision making. I mean, for me, these things are absolutely fascinating and truly enlightening. I hope that they're the same for you. Okay. What else are we doing with our data? You'll remember the diagram that I put up before, which showed that sort of pictorial representation of your organization in murmuration. What we're doing here is we're clustering our organizations. So what we're seeing is that organizations can variation in how they cluster as groups. We see this both within organizations, but also as organizations as a collective. So this is a simple view of 8 or 9 organizations and looking at the variation in clustering. Look at organization in red, highly cohesive. They're working together. Look at organization in the kind of blue, wide, disparate. Okay, wouldn't it be great to be able to quantify these, put measures? I can see them visually, but what does this mean in measures? Can we quantify this? Yes, this is what we do. It's part of what we do. And we can do this because we can see clear variations in clustering between organizations. We can also see what's interesting, something we call evidence of resistance. Resistance to what? Resistance to change. Okay, we talk about a world where it's constantly changing. We're living in this uncertainty. We need to be able to be agile. Goodness me, if I have to read that one more time without any real evidence and substantiation of what agility actually is, I will cry. But what we're trying to do is we're saying, what is the resistance to change? We've turned it around. We've said, it's not necessarily about how agile you are. It's about how resistant you might be to agility. So this is a similar, I forgot to put the key on here, so apologies. But up here, we've got our scoring, if you remember, and down here, we've got our confidence level. This is just 2 human beings, right? 2 human beings in your organization. You might have 100, you might have 1,000, but here's 2 of them. This human being here is saying, okay, I'm scoring you 5 and I'm kind of vaguely confident. Okay. This human being up here is saying, I'm actually scoring you pretty high, giving you a 10, but I'm kind of questioning my confidence in that, but I'm scoring you a 10. Imagine just for an instant, there was another person down here. They were scoring very low and very confident. We are very confident that we're rubbish in this organization about pretty much everything. We believe that individuals down here are more challenging to move than individuals over here. So there is a resistance to change as a consequence of where a person's score and confidence might place them. So imagine you've got a group of humans down here. They might be very tightly packed. So they might be very cohesive. There's a tight cluster, but they are incredibly resistant to change. Wouldn't that be fascinating to know? These are some of the things that we can inform our organizations. Where is there evidence of resistance to change? It means you can focus your efforts, your time, and your money in places that need it. So just very quickly, key outcomes that we're seeing before I just want to spend 5 or 10 minutes reflecting on 2 case studies, real live data and what we've done with clients. We're clear from our data, and yes, it's supported by governance and it's shifting around the world towards purpose. But it's not the clarity of purpose that seems to matter. It's the embeddedness of your purpose within your organization. Is purpose leading and defining the decisions that you're making? Is purpose forming part, are values forming part of the way that you're operationalizing your decisions? When you communicate, do you communicate in a way that's aligned with the values that exist within your organization? Because if you are, we are finding a very strong relationship between that and high-performing governing organizations. Leadership empathy. The willingness for leadership to be vulnerable and empathic is highly influential, and it's evoking psychological safety and trust within organizations. And it is highly connected to almost all the other aspects, all the other factors within organizational governance that we're measuring. And then the one I mentioned, which I know that will please many regulators, independent assurance. I'm not talking here about audits, all right? I'm not talking here about once a year bringing in an audit firm and saying, please tell us we're good, right? I'm talking here about ongoing, independent, internal and external assessment and assurance of everything that's going on in your organization, but most specifically and most interestingly to us is, are the values being lived? This isn't about independently assessing and ensuring your processes, your procedures, your control frameworks. This is not about independently assessing the quality of your audit committee. I'm not saying that's not important. What I'm saying is our data is suggesting that what should be happening in addition to that is, are the values that we espouse, that adorn the walls of our organization quite often, literally, are they being lived? Do they form the basis of the decisions that we make? Do they form the basis of the way that we communicate with each other? Do they form the basis of the way that we communicate with our customers? Because if that is being independently assessed and assured, our data says this is a highly dominant factor in the quality of your organizational governance. So what's all this? What's happening with all this? What's happening with all these data that we're getting and these core themes that are emerging? Well, our approach is that we want this to empower leadership teams. We want this to empower boards to embrace governance as a performance exercise and not a tick box comply and explain exercise only. We're not saying you don't need to do that, but what we're saying is, if you're going to spend the money on comply and explain audits and assessments, well, make that money worth your spend. Look at the power that it can provide to you, not just the ticking the box of compliance. Bring governance to the forefront of every single board's agenda. What we do in our technology is we take our data, we take our understandings, we take the knowledge of the interconnected relationships, and we steer organizations towards key influencers. So what we're able to do using our AI and our machine learning that's embedded within our technology is say, we have an understanding of the interrelationships. We have a picture of your data. And as a consequence, what we can do is we can say, of the 27 things that we measure, what 3 do we suggest you focus your time, effort, and money on? So rather than putting your finger in the air and going, oh, we need to improve our business performance, our governance, we need to, where do I need to get my return on investment. So we provide key directions on influencers. We use our data universe in order to benchmark organizations on a relative scale of maturity. Where are organizations on the maturity scale of their governance? Are you at the early stage? Are you in a developing stage? Are you at developed stage, or are you at mature stage? We have a relative scale that looks at the maturity of your governance as a whole, but also on your indices individually. And we take an organization's murmuration and we give you insightful information that says, okay, if this is the picture of our people, real life data again, smallish organization, 14, 15 people, what are we seeing in terms of the collective group, our clustering? What are we seeing in terms of the resistance to change? Because if we have low resistance to change, we're agile. And we have a clever method that puts cohesion with collaboration, cohesion with agility, in order to calculate a score of how collaborative are our people within and across our organization. Really, really useful information. And this is how organizations, in a moment, I'll show you how we've used it. The other thing we do is of course, corporate governance compliance isn't going anywhere, right? But it's not a comply exercise, surely. Surely we can do better than that. Surely we can begin to actually quantify where we are as organizations on a continuum. Most of you here will be familiar with King 4, right? These 4 absolutely critical outcomes. You can't just say you comply with an outcome. You might be able to comply with a principle, maybe. It's tenuous, right? Because compliance doesn't really exist. Non-compliance, yeah, that's everywhere. I can go into every organization on the planet and find non-compliance. But can I find actual compliance? Tenuous. But what I can do is I can measure how well we're doing things. How well are we affecting the outcome of ethical culture? How well are we creating long-term intergenerational value? I can begin to measure those. And this is what we do within our technology. It's not about comply and explain. It's about how well are we performing on the journey towards doing this really, really well. We can filter and observe differences across your levels, your departments, your functions, your ages, gender, countries, jurisdictions, locations. Really interesting to see, wouldn't it? How does our office in Mauritius differ from our office in Guernsey? Are there differences? What do those differences look like? So how are we using this? Very quickly. 2 case studies. Agility. So this organization, real data, we measured their organizational governance. These were the scores that they got, high level scores. Note these, around the kind of 60 mark, right? About 60% for each of their attributes, variations within them, but core themes of about 60%. So performing relatively well, but actually in relation to some organizations, certainly culture was not performing particularly well. And we also were able to afford this organization murmuration scores. Note those murmuration scores, 25%, 37%. Interestingly, agility, resistance to change, quite low. So whilst the organization is not cohesive, they're not particularly collaborative, but we saw them as being highly agile. So we thought that they could move quickly if they worked specifically. These were their influencers. We said, go away, work for 4 months, design an intervention program. We can support you with that if you want. We don't want to deliver it because we want to remain independent. You can deliver that internally. You can get an external advisor in, come and deliver this program, and we'll measure the effectiveness of that program. We'll measure the outcomes that follow. So the way they went, 4 months later, we came back. You remember the cohesion collaboration, 25% and 37%. Cohesion, boom. Collaboration, hugely uplifting. And look at the scores of governance. They worked on 1 indice out of 27. what we believe is one of the most impactful indices and factors within our model, embedding purpose and values within the entire framework of your organization. It forms part of your decision making. It forms part of your discussions. It forms part of your meetings. It forms part of your implementation, your operationalization, your communication with customers. Embed it. Because if you embed it, this is what happens. Everything rose by between 8 and 12%. Okay. Next case study. This is looking at, in fact, it's not looking at, I think it says there looking at agility. Sorry, merger. There we go. Yeah, to say merger. Sorry, I had the picture of myself in the way. So, quick case study looking at an organization that that had gone through a number of mergers. Ooh, sorry, I think I've lost. There we go. So, figure at the top, the whole organization. Figure below, 3 different jurisdictions across their organization. One organization here, one jurisdiction here. Highly, highly cohesive, very, very tightly grouped together. But what we're seeing is a dip into this area here of not being wonderfully agile. So the more people you see down here, the less agile. This jurisdiction here, all the same organization, right? This jurisdiction here, goodness me, no cohesion, very low collaboration, very low agility. So within an organization, we're seeing hugely different variations in cohesion, collaboration, and agility. And then this jurisdiction over here, actually, we saw this was the higher performing jurisdiction, this one, quite cohesive, very agile. Very few people in this bottom quadrant here, highly agile, very low in resistance to change, and highly collaborative. So we fed this back to the organization, and the leadership kind of looked at us and said, "Goodness me," they said, "what we're seeing here is not just 3 different jurisdictions.
Baron, I think we lost 3 different organizations."
Oh, you lost sound.
Can everyone else still hear Perrin?
Yes, we can hear Perrin.
Okay, thanks. We're good.
Okay. Thank you. So what we said to this organization, so I just pop back on if I can. No, I can't. No worries. What we were seeing in this organization was high degrees of variance across jurisdictions. We actually later started working with this organization. They went to investigate what was happening within that jurisdiction, and they realized that they had some significant issues that they needed to address that they hadn't even realized existed. So what we're being able to do, utilizing our approach to organizational governance, is give steerage towards organizations exactly where to spend their time, money, and effort in order to improve performance. We're seeing huge and increasingly validating anecdotal evidence that's saying that by investing time, money, and effort in the indices that we're highlighting, that you're seeing uplifts in governance performance, not just in that indice, but across many others, and in some instances, all other 26. We're beginning to be able to predict the ease of change. So yes, we can call it agility because that's a word that's used, right? But how easy is it going to be for us as an organization to shift and move, to get better at what we do? Because that's an important piece of information for leaderships and boards. That said, we're a research company. We're in the space of providing services, but we think there's more to be profoundly understood. We're on a journey. We really invite anyone here who wants to participate in this journey to come with us. You can contact me on any of the kind of usual networks. So as we begin to connect this work with other aspects of businesses, such as resilience, trust, and psychological safety, this is some of the work that we're going to be doing in 2023. What we want to do is we want to uncover exactly what governance is, and what it's capable of driving, because I don't think we really understand it. And I think we're beginning to see the power in it. I'm going to pause and say thank you very much. Here is an open invitation to anyone here to contact me. And I'm going to open ourselves to questions. I know that I've probably come a little bit into the edge of 1 o'clock, so apologies, but hopefully we're there. So please take a note, screenshot, however you like, and contact me.
Well, Perrin, thank you once again. Again, a very insightful and interesting presentation, even of data. Even I could understand it. So, wow, really interesting. And I think there's so much digger to deep to really understand exactly what you mean with all those, constructs and items and indicators. So truly intriguing and interesting. Thank you so much. But I think what you really managed to achieve is to illustrate the value of having this insight and this knowledge of your own company. I think you've illustrated to us how you can move from compliance to an outcomes-based view of governance, where one can actually, affect the bottom line and create value for all your shareholders. So indeed, really insightful. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
Okay. So time's up on our side, but I think let's do a few questions. Everyone, if you want to contact Perrin, you see his info here on the screen, his CoSteer email address, and of course you can also find them on the Good Governance Academy and the Research Forum web pages. So if you want to have specific discussions or inquiries, please feel free to contact him. I'm looking at our chat now, though. And
I'm trying to stop sharing my screen. I don't seem to be able to, because you're still seeing my screen, aren't you? So I'm trying to stop sharing, but have a look at the chat while I still play with all of this.
Okay. Oh, I've lost the chat here. Okay, so Mr. Ibrahim says this is a holistic picture of governance, and it gives a human and behavioral flavor to governance indeed. And that's what I always admire of you as an accountant. I really think this is so important, and once again confirms that governance is complex. It's not a tick box thing you can just read in a code and comply with. Indeed.
Thank you.
Okay. Just look at our Q&A as well. Okay, we don't have any open questions at the moment. So I think this is where we're going to call it the end of our webinar for today. You've shared your contact details, so thank you so much for that, Perrin, and we really look forward to all the webinars that will follow this year. Thanks once again for sharing all the valuable information with us. It really, you clearly illustrate the value, and thanks for that.
No worries.
Okay,
Thank you.
So
thank you everyone for attending. It's very generous to give you my time. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, thanks everyone. See you with the next one.